they seem very dark, but they're also very realistic. All right? God tells us in Revelations. So now the next question is, why is it that the Church of Christ, we'll call it the Universal Church of Christ, the Worldwide Church of Christ, why is it that the church has gone so far south? Why is it? What happened to us? How did we get to this point where we actually have to look at our lives and say, where did we go wrong? What did we do wrong? You see, the church, the Christian church as we know it, originally it was called Members of the Way. Okay? That was when Christ was here, and Paul later on, okay, he carried on, it was called the Way. Then they went underground. When they went underground, they came up Christians. Okay? That's the story of Christianity. The original Christian church as we know today was called Members of the Way. Well, here's the difference between Members of the Way and the Christian church. Members of the Way saw with their own eyes the Son of God manifested in flesh. Okay? Or they saw people who knew, who could testify to Christ, who knew him personally. And what happened when we went underground, a huge opportunity opened for manipulation to occur. So when we came back out of the ground, all we had then was the Bible and people's stories that were carried over for years and years and years. We all know the Old Testament, the Old Exam. If I say something to Glenn and he says you, by the time he's over to Dean here, the story will have changed. Right? Okay? So that's what happened to the Christian church. But Christ told us that it would happen through Paul when he talked about the Laodicea church. He said there will come a time in the end where the church will be what? A lukewarm church. Right? And that is where we are now, especially here in North America. Especially here in North America. Okay? So I kind of want to read off what I've written here because I really want to stay focused on how we got to this point in the Christian church. And then I want to take you to another place. It's called heaven. Okay? I want to show you what heaven will look like. Alright? So, in the world today, there seems to be a renewing spirit within the Christian movement to get away from the organized Christian churches. To get back to studying the Bible, living a Christ-like life, to get out of the church setting and more into the Bible setting. To try to come as closely as they possibly can to the way it used to be, in the way. Now, our church has done that very effectively. We've come a long ways. I'm sure we have a long ways to go. But we have done that very effectively. That's why we're set apart. That's why we're not in the city over there or the city over there. That's why we're here. Because we're set apart. That's why people like Andrew Strong are coming here looking for the remnant. Because we have worked very hard to maintain ourselves as a home church and not as a corporate church. Okay? Now, a corporate church is a church that has generally huge finances. They have an accounting department, they have a big payroll, they have all these things. But they're really primarily focused on providing a need inside of a church for their congregation and the financial support that goes with it. Their spiritual development isn't as strong as their service development. This church is more about developing you spiritually, maturing you out, so you can walk a closer walk with Christ. Okay? The corporate church also then turns around and they manipulate things. They change things so that church has essentially become a business and not providing the spiritual growth that they need to provide. Alright? One thing about a lot of big corporate churches, and we've had this issue in this church, but we're working on it, is people generally just go to church when there's a service. When there's a Sunday service or perhaps a Saturday night service, or maybe 2 Sunday morning or afternoon services. That's about as far as they go. But they don't really work on the development spiritually. All right? They also will not take stances against Halloween or take stances against Easter or Christmas or whatever it may be. They won't take stances against gays and lesbians. They won't take a lot of stances. Because by doing that, they risk themselves. Either the pastor will get fired because it goes against the belief system of a bunch of older folks who live there, or it goes against a board decision, or there's a whole bunch of things that happen inside of the corporate church. So that's the advantage we have. So, back in the way, they were completely different than today's Christian church. Okay, they were like, the Jesus experience today is debated amongst Christians. Well, did Jesus really do that or not? But back then, they knew Jesus, so there was no debate. They knew who he was. All right? So ask yourself this question. Right now, currently, there are 2.1 billion Christians around the world. That's not bad, right? Okay. If those 2.1 billion Christians had the passion of the first Christians, they all came together and heard one viewpoint. It was called Jesus' viewpoint, and not the opinions of other men, like Tony said this morning about men. Just one viewpoint called Jesus' viewpoint. They all come together in agreement on that one viewpoint, and they all stood together and all agreed together in prayer. What would this world look like today? Completely different than what we live in.